Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy Podcast. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy Podcast is brought to you in part by Florida Internet and Television. It's time to cut the tax on tech. Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Colin Roche, co-founder and CEO of Swiftmile. Welcome to the podcast, Colin.
Hello, Grayson. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you here. You and I met a couple of years ago, and your journey from when we first met today has been absolutely incredible. But your journey goes back a little bit further than that to January 4th, 2015, when you co-founded Swiftmile. What was the inspiration behind founding the company?
Well, I've been a serial entrepreneur for most of my life, for better or worse, as my wife might say. But I had recently exited a company and I was thinking about what to do next. And our current CFO, Leo Vera, he was CEO of a company down in Santa Barbara. And he said, hey, before you do your next thing, why don't you come down and consult with us? And going down to Santa Barbara isn't such a bad gig once a month and see where it goes. And had a blast doing it. It was a really successful company. And they had this Christmas party where if you entered in a little money for Toys for Tots, a donation, you got entered in a raffle to win an electric bike. And you have to understand something about myself is I had a Pook moped growing up. I used to take lawnmowers apart and put them on bikes. I mean, anything with two wheels in me was just like a huge win. So I entered it not thinking much about it. There's 300 people there. And unbelievably, I won the damn thing. And it was a killer, like $4,000 Penagain electric bike cruiser. And by owning it now, I was literally a kid in a candy store. And my wife would be like, hey, we're out of milk. I'd be like, no problem. I'll be back in 10 minutes. I mean, you didn't need to tell me how to, to get on this thing. But by using it, and this was really in 2014, it was very experiential. You could see that, man, if these things take off, there's going to be a bright future. And that kind of started our journey towards Swiftmile.
Did you try and modify that bike, putting some sort of motor on it to make it go faster?
No, what we did early was just by riding it, it was kind of more like the eye opener. But really started to kind of think about not so much the bike, but because, I'm in Silicon Valley, tried raising money back in 2014, 2015, based on building an electric bike that there was really no market for them yet. So I got together with my co-founders really that are today and started to think about if these take off, this is this sort of thesis. If the world is going to use these things, we called them pets at the time, personal electric transports. And you could see there was bikes coming out, electric skateboards, these little mini Segway things, all these kind of toys. The idea was, well, they're going to have to charge at some point. And perhaps if they're in a shared system, they're going to need to have like a parking system for them. So that was the idea. But really where the main kind of where it all gelled together was really, I was in a really bad traffic jam on El Camino heading towards Palo Alto. And I'm kind of sitting there going, man, I need to be somewhere quick. And a guy in the bike lane goes whizzing by me with a big fat smile on his face on an electric bike. And that kind of did it for me, saying, okay, we got to do something here with this. Kind of like Zipcar. And so that's what started this kind of really effort towards being the smart charging system for the vehicles.
When you were sitting there stuck in traffic of El Camino, did that raise memories of when you started Penagain and you're going to meet Walmart for the first time and you got out of the car and you ran into that meeting in the rain? Was that same thing going through? Like, okay, I've done this once as an entrepreneur, getting stuck in traffic and getting out of a car. Is that kind of history repeating itself for you?
Nice way to insert Penagain. Yeah, in many respects, I'm kind of an impulsive guy, I guess. And so you have an idea and it's easy for me to kind of quickly run through what the implications could be for the future. So yeah, I guess you could say that.
And so I'm going to stay in this Penagain here for a minute. You got in a lot of trouble in high school. You got an all-day Saturday detention and you're bored. And so you're a creative person. You start building something. And you started building the framework for Penagain in this all-day Saturday detention. Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, it's funny to talk about it now. My kids always get embarrassed when this comes up. But I started a company based around a product called the Penagain. And the way it all started was many, many years ago. I was sitting in a high school detention. This is in like the late 80s. It was like an all-day Saturday school, and you had to do things. You couldn't just sit there and stare at the wall. So I had that proverbial dollar in my pocket. And this is in Palo Alto, so they have a little flea market at the high school for Stanford students. And so I kind of walked around and I bought this little tchotchke thing that was like one of those Transformer little figurines that when you kind of turn the, play, so I took it back in the thing and in the detention. And when you played with it a little bit, when you turn it upside down, the little legs almost look like a crutch for your finger. And started to think about that. Hey, your hand has a weight to it. What if you could tap into the weight of your hand as the downward pressure? Maybe it would be a lot easier to write because back then, you're writing a lot. And my dad being a scientist, we used to always tinker with things and take them apart. So I did that, melted a light, took a lighter, melted plastic, and it was the biggest joke known to mankind at the time. Nobody thought this was a good idea. And then just kept it in the back of my head for many years. Went to college, went to Cal Poly, and talked about it then, and still nobody thought it was a good idea. And then not until like 2000 did I go for it, like at least kind of getting this to a point where I could make some prototypes. So when I'm old and gray with grandkids, that we could at least say that's what it was. But luck as it would have it is my good friend of mine was a mechanical engineer that I had lunch with one day. And he said, look, I do this for a living. I make CAD files. And the long and short of it, so we ended up making some prototypes and getting some excitement around it. And then we made some tooling. And then we went and knocked on doors literally in the Bay Area and started selling it. And it did quite well. It was selling out actually wherever it went. 10 stores turned into 100, 100 turned into 1,000, 1,000 turned into thousands. So we ended up raising money, going overseas to China. But this is kind of like 2003 when it was the Wild West days. Really brought our manufacturing costs down and then distributed globally. We got in over 25,000 retail stores, sold it all over the world. I think we sold over 10 million of these to date. But it made a big impact on people that had like arthritis or carpal tunnel syndrome or kids with ADHD. So got a lot of karma credits for sure. And then in about 2010, exited that and then moved on to some other ventures. But it still sells today. It's a fun story.
It's not only a fun story, but you've done a lot of good for children that with OT issues, and you should be extremely proud about that because you're having a fundamental positive impact on their life. So as writing and cursive goes away and uppercase and lowercase, everything goes typing, you're giving those children the ability to still learn the lost art of handwriting. And you should be very proud of that. And frankly, in my opinion, you should wear that with a badge of honor.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a great kind of a building block to what we're doing today, kind of learnings, oftentimes you learn in business what not to do. And, I'll certainly say that part of that experiment or that journey was part of that too. So appreciate it.
Well, in business, you might not learn what to do and you might learn what to do, but you also make impressions with individuals and you build relationships with individuals. And one of your former bosses was actually the first investor in Swiftmile. So obviously you left a really awesome impression with him. What was that like when he said, go make something happen?
Total props and credit to his name's Alex Edelstein, and great guy. And he was a CEO of a startup in San Francisco that I worked with him on. And afterwards, I started to look at this piece of what if the world really adopts these pets, these personal electric transports. And I met him for dinner up in San Francisco at some event and showed him the scooter at the time and some other things. And he said, "This is amazing." And I told him we're going to raise a small seed round. And he said, I'm first in right off the bat. And you really, without hardly any thought, really just wrote a check with the belief in me and my co-founders, which is a great lesson. Because I do think VCs and people always say that, oh, it's about the team. It's about the team. It really is. And you could have a great idea, but if you don't have any kind of good team behind you to execute, then it could be all for naught.
You and the team have been together for a while, right? You go back to high school together. Is that correct?
Yeah. So let's see. 3 of us actually go back all the way to middle school. And then our other co-founder, Leo Vera, goes back to college. So better part of 30 plus years, we've all known each other, which is important because you got to be able to, tell each other to screw off every now and again and get back on the horse the next day and keep plodding along. So it's a good working relationship.
It's a good working relationship. And the key dynamic of knowing you gentlemen is that you understand each other's personalities and what buttons to push and what not buttons to push, which to me gives you an inherent advantage as you look to scale. And as you go through good times and bad times, you understand personalities. So you're not going to get caught in one of these traps, which is a great thing for your company.
Yes, totally agree.
So 2015, this was a whirlwind of a year for you. Your former boss invests and you and the team said, let's go for it. Let's enter the Verizon Powerful Answers contest. Swiftmile ended up winning one of the transportation categories. You earned $250,000, and then you got a relationship with Verizon. What was that whirlwind of 2015 like from raising money from your former boss to winning this Verizon contest?
Yeah, it was really fortunate. We didn't even know it existed. There's a good friend of mine, John Asmussen, who worked at Verizon, was watching what we were doing and saw on LinkedIn a number of different posts that we had put up early days. And he said, "Hey, you should enter this contest. It's Powerful Answers Award. You know, they have big problems and they want big answers to it, powerful answers to these big problems. And transportation happened to be one of them. So we entered it really kind of on a lark, as you do with many things, right? I mean, there was 1,500 companies from 73 countries that entered this. And so, you're thinking your odds are pretty small. But what it really forced us to do, which I really liked about it, is really made us kind of focus our thoughts on, all right, what is the big picture? How can we impact the world? And so we started going about that. We entered the first phase, which is pretty long and deep. I was with Keith. We were up to like 5 a.m. in this office building that he happened to kind of have access to. So we sent that off, and a few months later, they said, "Hey, congratulations, you made it to round 2." And we went, "Oh, that's good." So then they said, "Expand on your theory, on your thesis." And again, and like another all-nighter. And then a few months later, they said, "Congratulations, you made it to the 3rd round." And that was kind of like a Shark Tank event. And so you have 10 minutes to pitch, 10 minutes for answers. Did that. And then a few months later, they said, "Congratulations, you're one of the winners." And so we kind of really didn't know as much what we were getting into. And then what ended up happening, and what was great, aside from the $250,000 off cap table money as a really good kind of a benchmark for seeding the company, we created a relationship with Verizon. And having the belief from a Fortune 15 company in your idea really gives you a lot of confidence in it. And so that's how we started the relationship. And since then, they've been an investor in most of our rounds, including this last round for our Series A. And they've been fantastic to work with.
Colin, over the years, you've developed this relationship with Verizon and they're becoming very public with their association with Swiftmile, from a Reuters article to public mentions. What did you do over the years to nurture and build this trusted relationship with Verizon?
Well, after we had gotten to know them and many of their team, different groups within their organization through the Powerful Answers Award, it became apparent that there's many opportunities potentially to work with them and using our platform, if you will. Every one of our particular stations, it's internet-enabled station. It has a cell module in it, and it's connected through cellular connectivity. But also from a long-term vision thinking, there's a lot of applications that can apply to us. Our stations get positioned in the public right of way. And so for many companies, not just Verizon, there's other things you can attach to our system: audio sensors, air quality sensors, people counters through our digital signage. So we look at more of like our system as like a beachhead, so to speak, on a lot of these coveted city rights of way. And I think there's a lot of opportunities working with Verizon. And there are many different areas within the company that can mesh well with that.
That's a valid point about cellular, and cellular is a part of our life. There's probably more cellular phones now than there ever were landlines. And so it'll be interesting to see as you roll out your systems, as the coverage around the dense urban environments continues to improve. And you have another great investor in Thayer Ventures, and they have an incredible group of advisors with a deep knowledge of the travel and hospitality space. So is it Thayer's going to help you open up the hospitality travel space, then Verizon's going to work with you in the urban environments? Is that kind of the investment strategy?
For sure. Thayer Ventures has been fantastic. Mark Farrell, he's our lead there. He's the former mayor of San Francisco, in between Ed Lee and London Breed. And many of their LPs are hospitality and travel oriented investors: Marriott, Starwood, all kinds of different groups like that. And a big part of our plan, obviously, rollout, is working with hotels and different groups like that. Because you can imagine now, when you get to a hotel, instead of hopping in the back of an Uber or Lyft, makes sense if you have a micromobility hub right there in front of the hotel to hop on a scooter, a bike, a trike, or whatever it might be. Yeah, so we're really excited about that. And really working with them, we've gotten to know them for 2 years, is we built up a lot of trust with them and vice versa. So we're coming in like with a really warm relationship to start either way.
That's incredible. So I used to travel all the time, like a lot of individuals did, and I love the hotel industry. I have a deep passion for it. Maybe one day my wife and I will open a hotel in the Caribbean, and perhaps we can put a Swiftmile system there that runs on solar. But will these be branded for the hotel? So if you're at a Marriott or you're at a Hilton or whatever the brand might be, will these be completely branded where it's a part of the hotel experience, or will these be just Swiftmile stations just parked on their property?
Yeah, it could be either or, but with the way hospitality, I mean, hotels work in particular, is you want to have this really fluid experience for the guest. So you get to the hotel, you have the let's say the Marriott app, and you can use that to use different things at the hotel. But then now you want to rent one of these vehicles, you rent it through the app as well, and that's Marriott branded. And so we can brand it as the hotel, or we could do it Swiftmile. It just depends on the business arrangement we have. But the whole goal make it seamless and easy because in hotels in particular, you can't hope to change their operations much and then have success. You have to make this where it's something that you just position right there. It's self-serve, it serves the guest, and then off you go.
Because the guest experience for the hospitality is absolutely key, but you hit on my favorite topic of brands. And during a meeting in Bentonville, Arkansas for a buyer with Walmart for Penagain, you told the buyer that you were building a brand. Today, you're building a Swiftmile brand. You have a really great understanding of the sensitivities around brands and how brands have to be integrated into the experience. So in the hospitality space, if you're dealing with, say, a Marriott or Hilton executive, do you talk about your understanding of the sensitivities of a brand into the guest experience?
Yeah, 100%. One thing that we've learned, not just in hospitality, but with cities in particular, is they want a universal system that is not specific to like a brand of an operator, a Lime, a Bird, Spin, and all that. And so in the public right away, when we talk with cities, we talk about our brand saying this represents a universal system that is inclusive, not exclusive. And similar like when we're working with whether it be hospitality or a big part of our growth that's coming is in private corporations where you can have your own private e-bike or e-scooter network. And there, the goal is very similar like what you mentioned with when I was at Walmart pitching the pen again, is they don't want to necessarily buy a product, they want a program. And they want a program that's branded. And so you're not just selling one particular thing, you're selling a host of different things as a turnkey program. And we do push that quite a bit. We don't just think of ourselves as a product. We think of it as a whole program.
Looking at programs, and let's stay on the private corporations here for a minute and pivot to the Department of Defense. You recently deployed at Edwards Air Force Base, and you're doing a really great service so the airmen can move around the base. Is that coming into the DoD and saying, look, we have this really great solution that can improve the camaraderie among the troops on the base?
It's some of that, and it's some practical stuff. It's really cool. First off, I mean, we didn't think in a million years we'd be doing business with the U.S. military, let alone Edwards Air Force Base, which is really where they test all the vehicles for the military. That's where Chuck Yeager tested the X-15. And once the things are approved there and tested, then they can tend to roll out to the rest of the world. And so for there in particular, big credit to Command Chief Ian Eishen. He recognized that the airmen, these young guys, they oftentimes are out of high school. They're pretty young. They show up with like a duffel bag and they have no way to get around. The base is really large, and to provide a convenient way for the airmen to go to the commissary or do these other things was the original idea. But it's got a lot of implications, not just for the airmen, but it turns out on base, there's a lot of families that live there too. So if you're at the base and you're part of the Air Force, you might have a family that doesn't have a car or any other way to get around. So it provides a pretty cool emission-free and fun way to get around on the bases. That's really starting to take off. We've got our 2 other bases lined up that we are in planning stages with now, and we're looking to go global with it. It's actually already happening, so very excited.
Thank you for being the bold Silicon Valley executive who's understands the sacrifice that the military goes in, and for taking that leadership mantle. And to the men and women of uniform who have served or are serving, thank you for your service. It's really important. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be enjoying this podcast today. So a huge round of applause and thank you.
I'll second and third that. It's incredible to work with them. And I have to say, getting involved with them and doing business with the groups that we've been with there, man, they know how to get stuff done. I mean, it's a different experience, than working with folks in the private sector. So huge tip of the hat to all of them.
It's a great experience working with them. And Colin, and you've got some great stories here, and you've got some great one-liners that have come out in the media over the years. And in October 2019, you told TechCrunch that Swiftmile will become a gas station for scooters. Great statement. Could you please expand upon that statement?
Yeah, we got a lot of mileage out of that. It was one of these things that just kind of rolled off the top of my head. But we've always looked at ourselves as, okay, if you see all these there's big vehicles, right? That's how the world started in really in 1915, when really the Model T started to really kind of go at scale. The only way that really expanded was when Standard Oil came out with the first real commercial gas stations that allowed you to buy this Model T and then allow you to actually get gas to run it. Prior to that, you would have to go to like one of these kind of hardware stores where they'd come out with this modified kind of a thing and they'd pour it into your tank. And so that was really when the cars were touring cars. It wasn't really a mass market thing. So when we look at micromobility, and we're like, as I think we all know, we're only in the first inning here. And the way they all came about, and big credit to Bird, was when they started putting these out in Santa Monica in late 2017. The reality is there's no free lunch. These things have to charge. And we started to look at it not just from the charging side, but also from the parking side. And as we started to progress, we realized, wow, these things, if you have to pick them up to take them home to charge, that's pretty inefficient because the scooters get damaged and it's expensive. You got to pay a lot of people to do that, and it's not quite as practical. Same with battery swapping, which certainly has benefits, but you still have to go find all these vehicles to do it. And so an in-field charging system makes a ton of sense for micromobility. And one of the ways that came about also was, all right, look, if we're out there in the field and we're literally have a system where these users can come by and drop it off and be incentivized to do that, to maybe get a credit on their account, or the operators themselves could drive it by to charge it. It really came about from one of the world's largest oil and gas companies out there that we are going to be announcing a partnership with here soon. And they told us, look, we are sitting on trillions of reserves of oil whose value is plummeting by the month. And electric vehicles, whether it be cars or these light electric vehicles, is obviously where the future is. And if you look at like where technology is going, nobody's sitting here right now saying, hey, let's go build an internal combustion gas engine and move people around cities. It's not happening, especially with global warming and stuff. And so the idea of being this new 21st century gas station is really where that came about, where you put these in dense urban areas to allow not just for shared scooters and bikes to use, but also for private users. And that's kind of what we mean by this gas station for shared light electric vehicles.
It's interesting that you bring up the Standard Oil question. And one could raise the question, what would Standard Oil, or if you want to refer to the trust, be without Henry Morrison Flagger? And from the rail cars to the pipelines and the constant innovation that he was doing on the behalf of John D. Rockefeller and Archibald, they were always constantly innovating. And the oil industry, especially as the industry changed, they were always 2 and 3 steps ahead on vertical integration. And as the micromobility industry changes, will you add new forms of charging to the Swiftmile station?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are sort of call it V1, we call it the Oasis, which is our predominant system we have out now that's here in the US, Europe, and soon Middle East and Asia. That one is 100% universal, and that one requires the user to plug in using our cable. There's pros and cons to that. Obviously, the con is that you have to have somebody plug it in. But by doing that, you're actually able to work with a majority of the market because you don't require any type of adapter to put on the vehicle, and you could get started right away. And that's how we did it. So we have, a lot of IP centered around actually other form factors of that with an adapter that you can place on the scooter or bike in various areas. But also, this is not just specific to things you ride, but it's also sidewalk drone delivery type vehicles and things like that. So absolutely.
Because if you look at like a competing industry that's starting to electrify, you have scooters that are electrifying, and you mentioned cars, and they're starting to electrify. And on the other side of electric vehicles, you have autonomous vehicles. And the autonomous vehicle industry is going through a wave of consolidation. There's some big news coming in the early next year of more consolidation. When will consolidation hit the micromobility industry, and what impact will that have on Swiftmile?
We're already actually seeing it to a certain extent. You saw what Uber did with Jump, with Lime. You're seeing right now, I just think I read today in the news that Bird is considering doing a SPAC. I don't know if that's true or if that's rumors. Not so much consolidation, but a different way of finding funding. For us, we like to think, like I mentioned, we're in the early days of this, is that it is so exciting to see the different new business models coming out based on electrified mobility. And so, yeah, there'll be a lot of consolidation. I think it's a little too early right now to really guess, because if you were to say before COVID what the likelihood of consolidation, I would say, man, it's probably going to be a lot of these guys roll up into one, or maybe one person wins all. But with COVID, it's given this massive tailwind to micromobility because people don't want to get in trains and buses and trams. And so I think it's given this kind of bigger extension before big consolidation happens.
Staying on that theme and looking at this, do we get to a point where Swiftmile deploys an electric vehicle charger on one half of the system, micromobility charging, and start putting these things in dense urban environments, and so you can get the entire range? So, for instance, say Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith comes into the urban environment, parks their car at one of your charging stations, hops on a scooter, goes around the urban environment, comes back and goes in their car and leaves. To me, it seems like you're on your Henry Morrison Flagger path here of vertical integration and scaling Swiftmile. Am I onto something or am I not onto something here?
Grayson, you're always onto something.
Oh, thank you, sir.
But yeah, the way we look at that is really centered around the whole concept of mobility hubs. And so, no, you're not going to put one of these on every corner in a suburban area. That would look a little goofy. But there are a lot. Obviously, there's bus stops and there's train stops, not usually too far from any urban landscape. And that's where you do it to where, okay, I know I can likely within pretty close proximity to my house grab one of these. And that's really where we see the goal. As a matter of fact, we're doing that in Germany with one of the rail lines there, where we're placing our systems on train stations, but also in the urban environment. So you can ride, let's say, in a centralized area in a suburb from there to the train station, thereby increasing ridership on the trains.
That's brilliant for the private sector. And another brilliant problem that you're solving is the clutter of scooters on a sidewalk. And you're currently operating a pilot in the city of Austin, Texas. And in a press release announcing your pilot, the city stated the following: this pilot will observe how efficiently Swiftmile stations can be used to manage sidewalk clutter, increase accessibility, improve access to fully charged e-scooters. Are empty, uncharged scooters littered around cities still a problem as it was 2 years ago?
In a typical city where you have a pretty large-scale micromobility deployment, it's common that half the time those vehicles are discharged. And a lot of that is just operating wise, it's tough being a scooter operator. I mean, you can't hope to have once a scooter goes dead, to pick it up right away. And so part of our whole thing, one of our little monikers, is we bring order to the chaos. And so by having these mobility hubs where these are destinations where you can park these, you really mitigate a lot of that discharged scooters. And so therefore you these assets that can be making money and revenue for the operators, and the user gets to hopefully not walk up to one and go, darn, this thing doesn't work. So that's a big part of what we help manage.
I'm going to put on my economics hat here for a minute. If I partner with you, and let's call me Acme Scooter Company, I'm a internationally known brand, and I deploy scooters. To me, from an economic standpoint, I can run less scooters by partnering with you and your charging. Am I correct on that?
Yes. I mean, if you're a scooter operator, about 50% of your costs are going towards charging for the different scooters and balancing. And so if you are spending a tremendous amount of your time and folks going around picking these up or chasing them down to replace batteries, or it's just very costly. So it just makes sense to where the vehicles are, that's where they should charge. And we don't say we try to stay away from the word docks. I mean, these aren't required that you park there, but when you use incentivizations, it drastically can reduce your operating costs for sure.
If I'm an investor, they're required because they just make so much economic sense. Is charging infrastructure the key to enabling profitable scooter deployments?
I think it's one of the pieces of the puzzle. What we've seen is there was Micromobility 1.0. That's kind of the early euphoric days, irrational exuberance, to borrow a phrase from the early 2000s. What you have to have is you got to have a really healthy ecosystem. With cities right now, when they allow 10 scooter operators to operate in a city, that makes it hard for anybody to make money. And so you're seeing Micromobility 2.0 is like you seeing what Seattle just did is they selected 3 operators. And you're starting this, and just by keeping our ear to the ground and looking at a lot of RFPs, you're seeing like 2 to 3 operators in a city. I think keeps it's called the carrying capacity in environmental lingo, where all 3 can make enough money to exist and they don't cannibalize each other's sort of food chain. But by doing that and adding charging infrastructure to it, mobility hubs is another piece that can really drive that profitability. So yeah, I think we are a piece of that puzzle, but not the only piece.
How are you working with the scooter companies to ensure that they have enough charging of where they're deploying?
All of our systems are, as I mentioned, they're cloud connected, internet enabled. And so we have open APIs and webhooks that if you're an operator and you're Swiftmile enabled, with the access to that, you can allow your users or let them know, Grayson, when you're done, if you park in one of these mobility hubs, they could give you some discount or whatever it might be. Spin's a great partner of ours. They put a lot of systems on private property, but also in some public, and they drive users to it. And they also use it for their own workers to take scooters there instead of having to take them out, outside the city limits to charge.
What are the city leaders' thoughts when you go and meet with a city leader and you show them your system? Is it like, yes, just like Austin said, you're going to help eliminate our clutter and solve a problem? Or what's the reactions like?
We have a business model that has really codified itself recently that is specific to getting to that, oh my gosh, I have to have it. When we first started, we were kind of shooting from the hip about, they didn't even know what they didn't know oftentimes, because when the scooters first came out, they didn't really know the pain points until they started going to city council meetings and people are holding signs saying, get rid of these things because of the clutter and because you're riding sideways on sidewalks. Those are kind of the growing pains of micromobility. But I think now everybody's fully bought in that there's a lot of value here. These are emission-free vehicles. Certainly with COVID, they help social distance. There's all this goodness there. And so we come in more as kind of like blessed are the peacekeepers, so to speak. Now what we do is we say, look, if you give us space in the public right away where the scooters are already taking up space, we're not going in to take up additional space, and you give us access to power, and you allow us to put we have a digital signage screen now that we've added to it, we'll give it to you for free. The cities won't even have to pay for it. As a matter of fact, the scooter operators don't even have to pay for it. We generate revenue off of our digital signage, but we also give the cities public service announcement space for, let's say, weather alerts, amber alerts, things like that. So it ends up being a win-win-win, win for the city, win for the operators, win for us, and arguably win for obviously the users, because now you've got a placemaking mobility hub. They're there. I should be able to get one, and I've got continuity where I can plan my day around knowing that there's one there.
It's a brilliant business model that's highly scalable. And on the other side, you're doing a lot of good for the residents of the city and the commuters in the city. You're helping to generate revenue for a city. And with the COVID pandemic that has completely wrecked their budget, you're doing good there. And then on the other side, as I said, you're generating enough money to have a good ROI for your investors to continue to hire and expand. So I really commend you. And Colin, as we look to wrap up this wonderful conversation, it's been extremely insightful. What would you like our listeners to take away with them about the Swiftmile and the future of micromobility?
I have a 15 and 17-year-old that have been part of this journey now, obviously for 5+ years, and they've kind of seen it take a number of different shucks and jives, and now they've been students of the game, and so they often ask, like, Dad, what does the future look like? I tell them how exciting this is. I mean, look at this. We are right now just riding these scooters that really first started off as a retail product that they put into a shared system, that are now more robust, that are meant for sharing. What does the actual vehicle look like in 2, 3, 5 years? They're all going to be electric. I mean, 99% of them. Maybe there's a hydrogen-based one, but those all need to be charged. And so, it's not just us driving this. We like to think we're one of the pioneers of it, but we look to constantly make this an extensible system to all of that and more. And so we just look forward to, support from the community, and we're scrappy hustlers here that like to shuck and jive with the market. But we couldn't be more excited for really how the market's evolved, and we're just honored to be a part of it as it grows.
And it's important to point out again that you and the founding team go back to high school, and I can't emphasize how important that is of understanding the personalities. And Colin, Swiftmile has an extremely bright future, and I can't wait to see some of these big announcements that are coming, and as your company continues to grow and expand across the globe. And the future's bright. The future is charging infrastructure. And Colin, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy to share your wonderful story with us. Great.
Thank you, Grayson. Real honor to be here. And to the moon. Let's make it happen.
To the moon, and away we go. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte and Company. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.